More than 7,000 nurses strike at 2 New York City hospitals. 200 Rohingya Muslims fleeing persecution reach Indonesia. Israel bans Palestinian flags in public spaces. Donors pledge more than $9 billion to help Pakistan recover from deadly floods. British Airways' new uniform collection includes hijab option. Khabib Nurmagomedov retires as MMA coach. From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. More than 7,000 nurses at 2 of New York City's largest hospitals went on strike Monday. This was over the need for proper patient care, which they say is being hindered by nurses facing widespread burnout and staffing shortages. The strikes took place at 3 locations of Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx and Mount Sinai Hospital in Upper Manhattan, according to CNN. Talks collapsed overnight into Monday when officials from the hospitals and unions came together to the bargaining table. Tentative agreements were made at several hospitals over the past week, including 2 new agreements late Sunday, but not at the locations of the strikes. A 19% pay hike had been offered to the union, which they refused. Nancy Higgins, president of the New York State Nurses Association, said staffing shortages during the pandemic have not been righted since. She said the hospitals are not filling the shortages, citing Montefiore Medical Center's current 760 staff openings. It's caused an untenable ratio of nurses to patients, sometimes as high as 1 to 20. Lack of staff and nurses being overworked has caused burnout not only in New York City, but in medical establishments worldwide. Former D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone blasted Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill for their paltry attendance at a January 6 remembrance ceremony. The event honored law enforcement officials who protected the complex during the Capitol riot. According to media reports, only GOP Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania was in attendance at the Friday ceremony dominated by Democrats. Fanone called the lack of support by Republicans disgraceful. He also criticized the GOP reaction to the event as an embarrassment for the party. Fanone served with the Metropolitan Police for roughly 20 years before resigning in December 2021. Fanone received the Presidential Citizens Medal, among the nation's highest civilian awards, from President Joe Biden on Friday during a White House ceremony. The Muslim community in Dearborn, Michigan is facing a growing mental health problem, according to local reports. Police, in partnership with social workers, went on a record number of mental health runs in 2022, reports said. As of December 21st, Dearborn officers responded to more than 1,000 mental health emergency calls last year, a 31% increase from the previous year. Dearborn is home to one of the largest Muslim communities in the U.S. and is unofficially known as the capital of Arab America. Mental health issues have worsened because of the stigma surrounding mental illness within Muslim communities. Harnada Hamid Al-Talib, president of the Institute for Muslim Mental Health, told the Detroit News there is a resistance to talking about mental health in Muslim culture. Police, the city's Department of Public Health, and the Arab Community Center for Economic and Social Services have been working together to address such issues. Last month, police began a program using social workers inside the department to respond to mental health-related emergency calls. Sunday's fascist attack on Brazil's government complex was directly aided by social media platforms such as Facebook, TikTok, and Telegram, a global watchdog group said. Brazilian authorities continue their cleanup efforts, investigation, and arrests of suspects involved in the anti-democratic assault. The nonprofit Some of Us has been monitoring the proliferation of election lies on social media in Brazil. The group's campaign director, Flora Rebelo Arduini, said the insurrection was carried out by supporters of far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro. Arduini said social media executives were warned that their platforms, tools, and algorithms were aiding a violent uprising. Some of Us estimates that Facebook ads sowing doubt about the Brazilian elections and agitating for a military coup accumulated at least 615,000 impressions. The January 6, 2021 assault on the U.S. Capitol was also abetted by social media giants, Arduini said. She added, if governments fail to respond, more will inevitably pay the price. On Monday, hundreds of people in Bangladesh protested the death of an expatriate Bangladeshi student in a police shooting in the United States. Protesters formed a human chain in front of the Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the capital Dhaka, condemning the death of Syed Arif Faisal. The 20-year-old was a student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Faisal was killed by police Wednesday afternoon in Cambridge. He died at Massachusetts General Hospital. Rear Admiral Eileen Lawbacker, the U.S. National Security Council's senior director for South Asia, paid an official visit to the Bangladeshi ministry on Monday. The U.S. official is on a 4-day visit to discuss security, the Rohingya crisis, and other bilateral issues with high government officials in Bangladesh. The country's Foreign Minister Abul Kalam Abdul Momen told reporters the U.S. has assured Bangladesh of ensuring justice in the case of Faisal's death accordingly. British Airways' new uniform collection will include tunic and hijab options for female employees, the airline announced. British Ghanaian fashion designer and tailor Oswald Boateng created the collection, which was 5 years in the making. The airline said this is the biggest change in its employee uniforms in about 20 years. Roughly 30,000 employees are switching to new uniforms as of this spring. Female cabin crew will also be allowed to wear jumpsuits. A tailored 3-piece suit has been made for men, while women who do not wish to wear a jumpsuit have a dress, skirt, or trouser options. British Airways CEO Sean Doyle said, "Our uniform is an iconic representation of our brand, something that will carry us into our future." Israel bans Palestinian flags in public spaces. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Israel's far-right security minister on Sunday ordered police to tear down Palestinian flags wherever they are found in public. Itamar Ben-Gvir, a leader of the ultra-nationalist Jewish Power Party, said he directed the police commissioner to implement the new policy. Ben-Gvir was convicted in 2007 of incitement to racism and supporting a terrorist organization after he advocated the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. His order to remove the Palestinian flags comes after recent protests in which tens of thousands of Israelis marched together against fascism and apartheid. Demonstrators were protesting the country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right coalition government. Hussam Zomlot, who heads Palestine's diplomatic mission to the United Kingdom on Monday, called the flag ban repressive, racist, and childish. A previous prohibition sparked widespread defiance and creative acts of resistance before being lifted in 1993 under the Oslo Accords. Israeli courts have affirmed flying Palestinian flags is not a crime. International donors on Monday pledged more than $9 billion to help Pakistan recover from deadly floods that devastated the country last year. The commitments were made at the International Conference on Climate Resilient Pakistan in Geneva. The conference was jointly hosted by Pakistan and the United Nations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Pakistan was doubly victimized by climate chaos and a morally bankrupt global financial system. He said the system routinely denies middle-income countries the debt relief and concessional funding needed to invest in resilience against natural disasters. Guterres identified South Asia as one of the world's global climate crisis hotspots. More than 33 million people have been affected by flash flooding in Pakistan. Over 1,700 lives have been lost, 2 million housing units affected, and several thousand schools and hospitals damaged or destroyed. The fate of 18 miners trapped in a collapsed gold mine in northwest China remains uncertain nearly 2 weeks after the accident, officials said. Of the 40 miners working underground at the time, 22 were safely rescued. Chinese authorities have not given any updates about ongoing efforts to extricate the miners. The reason for the collapse remains unknown. An anonymous employee at the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Emergency Relief Supervision Command Center told Radio Free Asia that rescue operations were ongoing. RFA reports most of the 18 workers underground were Uyghurs from government organizations in Ulja County. Elfidar Hanim, president of the Uyghur American Association, said Chinese authorities are protecting their reputation and placing themselves above public safety. A wooden boat carrying nearly 200 Rohingya refugees, mostly women and children, landed on Indonesia's western coast on Sunday, local police said. It is the fifth boat carrying Rohingya refugees to land in the country since November, authorities said. Thousands of the mostly Muslim Rohingya fleeing persecution in Burma risk their lives each year on long and costly sea journeys. They often escape in poor quality boats attempting to reach Malaysia or Indonesia. About 1 million Rohingya are estimated to be living in refugee camps in Bangladesh after fleeing the Burmese military's genocide in 2017. Chechens, Crimean Tatars, and people from the former Soviet republics are fighting for Ukraine. Members of these communities have deep historical grievances against Moscow. Ukraine's military commanders have said they do not lack soldiers for the war, yet they have welcomed thousands of volunteers, including foreign citizens, to their ranks. Many of the volunteers, such as the Chechens, are refugees from Russia already living in Ukraine. Other volunteers have come from surrounding nations, such as Georgia, with a history of opposing Moscow and President Vladimir Putin. Khabib Nurmagomedov took early retirement as a mixed martial arts fighter and is now stepping down as a coach. Nurmagomedov shared an Instagram post in Russian saying he's leaving the sport. Javier Mendez, coach at the American Kickboxing Academy in San Jose, California, confirmed to Yahoo Sports Nurmagomedov's retirement plans. Mendez coached him to the UFC lightweight title. He then led Islam Makhachev to the belt, coaching alongside Nurmagomedov. Mendez said Nurmagomedov has been away from his family a great deal and simply wants to spend time with them. Nurmagomedov has 2 boys and a girl. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. To discuss the Israeli minister's storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana. And hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. We now move to a discussion of Israel and Palestine. As you all may know, the Israeli government has installed its new ministers, and as many predicted, chaos has begun to erupt. The human rights violations are escalating. To discuss what this means, not only for the Palestinian and Israeli people, but for American foreign policy, very welcome on our special guest, Mr. Richard Silverstein. Many of you know him. He is the famous author behind Tikkun Olam, the blog. He's an author, writer, and a journalist. And we're happy to have him back with us today. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yes, happy to have you back. So first, for those who really don't know about the makeup of this new Israeli government, can you tell us about who is in this government? What are their stated policies? What makes them a bit different than even some of the extremist governments we've seen in the past?
Well, the innovation, if we can call it that, of this government is that it's become the first fascist government in the history of Israel. The views of the ministers are the farthest right that any government has ever had. And some of the issues that they're going to take up involve misogyny against women, homophobia, and also, of course, even worse, approach to the Palestinian people and conflict in Palestine. Some of the things that they want to do are to separate women and men in the public sphere, not allow women to travel on buses with men, to exclude women from serving in the Israeli army, to permit business people and doctors to refuse service to gay people, and to outlaw the gay pride parade that happens in several Israeli cities. And finally, and perhaps the most damaging, will be basically destroying the ability of the Supreme Court to overrule laws that are passed by the Knesset, which until now has had a balance of the branches where the judiciary could act as a restraint on the legislature. The new override clause, if passed, would allow a majority vote in the Knesset to override any ruling of the Supreme Court. And I like to say that basically it turns it into a court that is dealing with traffic tickets.
So, Richard, let me follow up and ask you this. So talk to us in particular about Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, and what I understand is this government's pledge, stated principle that they believe all of the land, including the West Bank and Gaza, all of that, that only Jewish people are entitled to that land, even land where Palestinians live. Is that true? Is that their stated position? And what does that mean for the Palestinian people going forward?
So I'd like to just go back and talk about 2 particular ministers who are the most extreme and even outrageous members of this new government. We have Itamar Ben Gvir, who's the new police minister. even though he's been convicted 50 times by the judiciary, with the police itself investigating his incitement to terrorism. So 50 convictions for doing that. He's the leader of the Hilltop Youth, the most extreme, savage, and violent settler terror group. Among other acts of terrorism, it burned to death the Dawabsha family in Duma, and killed, among them, the parents and an 18-month-old baby. So this is Ben Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich is now heading the government approach to the West Bank. All of the settlements that are going to be built are going to be at his behest, and any repression and any destruction of homes and evictions from villages in the West Bank will be controlled by him. Smotrich was found by the Shin Bet about 20 or 25 years ago to have a bomb in his car that he was going to explode as a protest against the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. So there you have those fellows. And Netanyahu announced that the platform of this government, going back to what you were talking about, would uphold the inalienable rights of the Jewish people to sovereignty over all territory from the river to the sea, which of course means that for all intents and purposes, Israel is going to annex or consider annexed all of this territory, including the West Bank. The 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank basically would become stateless, citizenless, and they would have no citizenship, of course, in Israel, but they would be under the heel of Israeli forces. So that's a sort of a snapshot of what is to be.
Now that the government is in control, talk to us about some of the major developments. So I understand Mr. Ben Gvir paid a visit to the Al-Aqsa Masjid, also known as the Temple Mount, in an attempt to, I don't know, spark controversy at the least, or something much worse. Can you tell us about why that visit was so important to him and why it was so controversial?
I don't think that Americans are aware of the equation that's going on in the Haram al-Sharif. Because of the intricacy of the Muslim-Jewish relationship to the actual physical spot. There was a temple in this spot, and Romans destroyed it in ancient times. And now Al-Aqsa basically stands in that spot. Israelis until now have worshipped at the Kotel, which are the outer walls of the old temple. But now, since 1967, a radical settler movement has arisen that wants to force its way to the Temple Mount. That's their terminology. Jews call it the Temple Mount, and Muslims call it Haram al-Sharif. And they want to force their way so that they can pray on the Temple Mount. And the prayers that they're giving are for the rebuilding of the Temple Mount. Now, the only way that you could rebuild it, of course, is to destroy Haram al-Sharif. And that's where you get into this potential sort of end of days kind of religious confrontation that could happen. So Ben Gvir, it's important to note that in his home, he has been interviewed by Israeli TV with a picture of a mosque and the minaret of the mosque toppling over, which is basically an allusion to destroying the temple, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And he also has a picture of Baruch Goldstein on his wall that has been shown in a TV interview. Now, Goldstein is the settler who murdered perhaps the largest number of Palestinians in a single terror attack. 29 people were murdered, I believe, in the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron in 1990s. So Ben Gvir is a real charmer, and he, in quotes here, he, once the government was named, he said he was going to storm the Temple Mount, and he was going to basically take possession of it. And then Netanyahu saw better, and he said that the visit was going to be postponed. And within a day, Ben Gvir actually did go to the Temple Mount. He went at 7 in the morning when there were very few people there, and he had a huge contingent of police with him. And even though this violated the status quo on the Temple Mount, he was seen in pictures praying with a rabbi there. again praying for the rebuilding of a third temple. So we have Ben-Gvir, who is not only willing to incite controversy and violence by Palestinians who object to this approach. He's eager to do that. His view and long-term view is that he wants to create an end time scenario where Israel will finally, the Jewish people will finally destroy the will of Palestinians, destroy the will of the Muslim world, and to sort of finally determine the superiority and the sovereignty of Jews over the entire land of Israel, including the holiest, third holiest site in Islam, and a holy site for several different religions. So that's the vision that he has, and that's why it's incredibly dangerous, and that's why this government is the most dangerous in the history of Israel.
So, Richard, what do you think this means for American foreign policy? Because as far as we can tell, President Biden and other U.S. leaders warmly welcomed Netanyahu's victory, even though they knew that he's a war criminal and a racist, and they knew who he was going to put in his government. So what do you think this means, if anything, for U.S. foreign policy? Any change in terms of rhetoric for the United States or policies that might result from this government being so extreme?
Our policy is basically to nibble around the edges, and our government and our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is asleep at the switch. The barest minimum that they could muster here is to express their concern at the nature of the government, and then to say that the U.S. will be dealing not with personalities, by which it means Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but with policy. As if the policy of appointing Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is not a policy in itself. And the U.S. has also said that it may deny entry to the United States to any Palestinian who's ever engaged in violence against Palestinians. And so that's about as far as we've been willing to go, which really isn't very far at all. And I think we should note that Biden basically wants to downplay the significance of the Middle East in U.S. policy. He does not want to delve into it as deeply as Obama did by having John Kerry try to negotiate a settlement with the Palestinians years ago during his administration. Biden, I think, has learned his lesson from that and realized that Netanyahu doesn't want a settlement. He doesn't want a two-state solution. And our government keeps talking about a two-state solution, and the acts that the Israelis are engaged in will endanger the two-state solution. And it's really basically like an ostrich with its head in the sand, because there's no possibility of a two-state solution. That option is dead. It's been dead for a decade or more. The only option, the viable option, is a one-state solution. And yet we and much of the world is refusing to acknowledge that.
Well, Richard, I guess time will tell how this all plays out with Mr. Ben-Gvir and his extremist racism, and then the government and President Biden, 2024 election coming up. There are all sorts of factors that can impact what happens next. So we look forward to having you back to discuss this further. Hopefully discuss good news, God willing. But in any case, look forward to having you back in the future, Richard. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, Edward. It's great to be with you.
And we'll send it back to you, Samana.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.